All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring a seriously fascinating premise. The idea that gaming isn't just some trivial pastime, it's actually the absolute foundation of human social interaction. We are going to trace the lineage of multiplayer gaming, starting from its ancient, purely physical roots, all the way up to a brilliant modern revival of the communal game night.
To really set the stage here, we have a profound quote from the Dutch cultural historian Johan Huizinga. In his 1938 book, Homo Ludens, he basically argued that games were a primary condition for the generation of human cultures. As he puts it, play is literally older than culture. Humans just have this innate, fundamental necessity to play. It's not just entertainment, right? It's literally how we developed language, law, philosophy, and art.
And mapping out the timeline of history brilliantly illustrates just how far back this necessity goes. Over 5,000 years ago, humans were out there carving dice out of the talus bones of animals. These were known as knuckle bones. By 2600 BC, we'd evolved to gathering around beautifully crafted wooden boards like the royal game of And then, fast forward thousands of years to the 1970s, and we swapped out those wooden boards and stones for, well, glowing screens.
Section 1. The Royal Game of the Ancient Blueprint for Social Play. So, our first micro-case study is the Royal Game of This was famously discovered by English archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley back in the 1920s while he was excavating the Royal Cemetery at We're talking about a 4,500-year-old Mesopotamian race game. But here's the kicker. It wasn't just a game. It was deeply embedded across all social strata in the Middle East. At the height of its popularity, board events were actually interpreted as conveying messages from deities or ghosts of ancestors, or even telling a player's future. Landing on a certain space might mean you will become powerful like a lion, or, perhaps more importantly, you will draw fine beer.
Let's actually break down these mechanics, because honestly, you could sit down and play this ancient game right now. 2 players sit opposite each other, and you each get 7 pieces. You roll a set of 4-sided tetrahedron-shaped dice. 2 of the corners are marked, 2 aren't, and that dictates how many spaces you move. The board itself has a narrow bridge in the middle, which creates 6 safe squares where your pieces are totally protected, and 8 combat squares in the middle, where an opponent can land on your piece and send it all the way back to the start. Oh, and if you happen to land on one of the special colored rosette squares, you get an extra roll.
But what is absolutely fascinating is the social and, frankly, gambling aspect of this game. During one archaeological dig, 21 white balls were uncovered right next to a game of set. And according to ancient cuneiform tablets describing the rules, these were highly likely used for placing wagers. If you skip a rosette, you have to put a token in the pot. If you land on one, you take a token out. You can just imagine the yelling, the cheering, the whole party-like atmosphere as people gathered around to watch the dice roll and the money change hands.
Section 2. From boards to screens, the era of isolation.
So, despite a literal 5,000-year tradition of rowdy, communal gaming, our habits hit a dramatic shift. For millennia, games like or Senet in Egypt or Pachisi in India, they were highly physical. They demanded a shared physical space. But with the advent of the electronic era, the whole paradigm changed. In the 1950s and 60s, computer games ran on massive university mainframes. The digital play experience became totally solitary. It was just you, staring at a single screen, completely isolated from the room around you. And the really crucial point here is that this isolation entered the home in 1972. That was the year the Magnavox Odyssey, the very first home video game console, was released. Suddenly, gaming was locked into the living room, physically restricted by the hardware to just 1 or 2 people holding a controller, staring forward at a low-resolution display. That communal circle of players standing around a board, it was completely broken.
Section 3. Unfolding the 8-bit era. Bringing the party back.
So how in the world do we get that social magic back using digital tools? Well, researchers at ETH Zurich and Disney Research cooked up an absolutely wild project. Picture a classic Nintendo entertainment system sitting right in the center of a table, but it's connected to a custom 8-gamepad multiplexer. And that hardware, it outputs into an expanding 360-degree projection of a classic side-scrolling game that wraps entirely around a large event room. They actually tested this setup live with over 400 attendees at a conference banquet.
The hardware enhancements they used here are just genius because they practically force social interaction. Instead of just awkwardly handing a controller to a friend, the custom multiplexer automatically hands off control from one gamepad to the next. It does this either on a fixed time interval or based on your progress in the game. Right before the control transitions, the active gamepad number blinks on that giant wall projection and a light physically flashes on the next controller. It forces players to physically coordinate, yell to their peers to jump in if a pad is empty, and seamlessly cooperate without ever pausing the actual game.
But think about this for a second. How do you get a game made for a tiny, boxy TV to wrap around an entire massive room? The software side is an incredible feat of computer vision. First, they capture the old 240p analog video signal. Then, their algorithm calculates the horizontal pixel offset between the current frame and the previous one. They use a metric called an L1 norm color difference to pull this off, which basically helps the system ignore foreground characters, like Mario running around, and focus strictly on the background. By tracking that apparent camera motion, the software seamlessly stitches the video frames together into a continuous, expanding panoramic texture, all in real time.
Now, stitching these frames together means you have to make a choice about how to composite the images. The researchers tested a median mode, which uses the last 20 frames to perfectly estimate what the background looks like. This successfully suppresses those pesky foreground characters, but if the tracking is even slightly off, the whole output gets a bit blurry. So ultimately, the team went with direct mode. This mode simply uses the previous frame. It keeps the image incredibly sharp and visually appealing, even though, it occasionally leaves a funny little trail of frozen foreground characters scattered in the game's past as the panorama expands.
Section 4. The full circle of play, from to virtual reality.
What we are witnessing here is a massive technological leap that perfectly synthesizes the digital age with our ancient hardwired need to gather in a circle and just play. And hey, for those of us who don't have a massive multi-projector banquet hall at our disposal, the researchers didn't forget us. They successfully recreated this entire immersive, wraparound social experience using virtual reality, specifically the Oculus Rift DK2. By placing a user right in the middle of a virtual room with the game unfolding across all 4 virtual walls, they proved that the feeling of a life-sized communal game realm can absolutely be replicated inside a headset.
So the next time you sit down in front of a glowing screen, just remember, you are actively participating in a 5,000-year-old human tradition. Whether it's gambling white tokens around the game of in ancient Mesopotamia, or yelling across a 360-degree projection hall as your NES controller suddenly blinks to life, play is, at its core, fundamentally social. Knowing these deeply communal roots of how we play, how will you change the way you interact with your friends during your very next game night? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you in the next one.